piano, and I can bring that over to you if you'd like to try that. Just give me a little wave. There's going to be a Q&A after the event. You should have received an index card that you can use to write down your questions, but if not, we have more, so never fear. If you find yourself with a question and you need an index card, you can also give us a wave and we will bring you an index card at the close of the event. And finally, many of you received a survey when you came in. Please feel free to fill that out after the event and then return them to us as you head out. Now I am delighted to introduce Katie Campbell, the host of the KUOW Book Club. Katie joined KUOW's online team as an editor and reporter in 2024 after serving 3 years as senior producer of the local Morning Edition program. She's covered a variety of local topics, including the Seattle City Council elections and breaking news. In 2024, Katie created the KUOW Book Club, featuring stories and authors from the Pacific Northwest. Katie picks monthly titles and provides analysis along the way. She ends each reading with an author interview, giving readers a look behind the scenes from some of the most talented writers in the region. And you can join the KUOW Book Club, too, if you haven't already, by signing up for the newsletter at kuow.org. Katie graduated from University of Florida's College of Journalism, and she is also an avid pea patch gardener. We were just talking about that. And she's an auntie. So please help me welcome Katie Campbell.
Thank you so much, Stesha, and thank you all for being here this evening. Welcome to KUOW and Seattle Public Library's Summer Reading Series. Our special guest this evening is the one and only Lynda V. Mapes, author of this month's KUOW Book Club pick, The Trees Are Speaking, Dispatches from the Salmon Forest. Lynda is a journalist, nature writer, and author based here in Seattle. She is the author of 6 books of natural and cultural history of the Pacific Northwest, and she has won numerous awards celebrating her work. And I just want to share that I picked The Trees Are Speaking for the KUOW Book Club this month because we all know that the world around us is changing dramatically. But sometimes it's hard to know what exactly that means, how we got here, and most importantly, what we can do to protect things like old-growth trees, the very trees that Lynda documented so lovingly in this book. I really enjoyed joining her on this adventure across the country, and I hope y'all did too. So without further ado, let's give Lynda a hand and have her join me up front here. That would help, wouldn't it? Lynda, I have a bunch of prepared questions this evening, of course, and many more that we could not get to on paper. And we will take questions from the audience. So as Stesha mentioned, you received something to write those questions down with. So hold on to those. I'll let you know when we're going to collect them, and we will make sure that you get to ask your questions as well. I've already got one here in my lap, which is fabulous, and I'm going to put it on the table just in case. So The Trees Are Speaking at its core is about old-growth trees, of course, as the title suggests. Trees that are hundreds of years old that we're still learning so much about, but that we know have huge effects on their ecosystems. So Lynda, why did you choose to write about these trees now?
Good evening, everyone. It's great to be here with you.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
Are you hearing this okay? Very good. Terrific. So these trees have always captivated me. Living here in the Pacific Northwest, we're blessed both because of the species and the age of these trees. It's not just any tree that can live to be 1,000 years old or be 200 feet tall. Only some species can do that. Douglas fir, red cedar, spruce. We've got these trees here in the Pacific Northwest, and we have the climate for growing them. That cool, wet, long winter, that grows a really big tree. I actually grew up in the Northeast in Westchester County, New York, which is 50 miles north of New York City. This is a deciduous kingdom. Oh, we had our white pines, and they were lovely. We had our white cedar, but it was much more of a deciduous royalty. Red oak, sugar maple, beech. And I love these trees, and they still live deeply within me. But coming out here, now that was a new thing entirely. And so the very first time I encountered these spectacular forests of the Pacific Northwest, I just knew that this was going to be something that I was going to be fascinated with the rest of my life. And in my work as a reporter at the Seattle Times, I spent a lot of time working on forests and forest ecosystems. And when I was talking with Jerry Franklin, who is one of the world's eminent forest ecologists, just making small talk before beginning an interview, I asked him, well, what are you working on? What are you thinking about? And he said, oh, I'm thinking about writing a book called What the Old Trees Taught Me, about old growth forests for a general audience. And I thought two things. That's a great idea, and he'll never do it. I love and revere Jerry Franklin, and I called him up a couple weeks later, and I thought, well, what do you think about maybe teaming up? And ultimately, what that turned into is this book that I wrote, but which Jerry Franklin deeply informed, encouraged, fact-checked, was really a force throughout the whole project. And the time that I spent in the forests of the Pacific Northwest with Jerry Franklin at the beginning of the reporting is exactly when this book pivoted and became a very different book. And we'll talk about that as we go on tonight.
I think what I love, Lynda, is that you've been among these trees for so long, very many different kinds of trees, and you have had this connection, it sounds like your whole life, and yet there's still awe, like they still clearly inspire you. So I wonder if you can take us for a walk through an old growth forest. Like, what do you notice when you first step into among these trees? What do you see? What do you smell? What do you hear?
I love that question because it puts me there. So the very first thing is the tread underfoot, that very, very soft tread, the deep, deep forest floor that's been building for thousands of years. The next thing, of course, is the quiet. It's like a recording studio because it is so soft. Every surface is soft and rounded. And I think that the sound is only surpassed by the smell. So it's that fructifying funk. It's that gorgeousness of soil and moss and wet, and then the quality of the light. It's ever changing. You know, an old growth forest that's an intact old growth forest is not any one thing. It's not just big trees, and they're not damp and dark places. These are places that are defined by variety. Yes, there are enormous trees, but there are also big gaps where a tree has fallen over and sunlight is pouring down to the forest floor and the next generation is rising. There's an understory replete with everything from ferns to berries to even tiny, tiny little calypso orchids, the flowers no bigger than your pinky nail. To me, it's the variety of the trees, their species, but also the textures and the age classes in a true natural old growth forest. It's no one thing. I can tell you some very favorite old growth forests that I would really recommend that you go experience. So, of course, 5-star favorite, the Hoh River Trail. If you haven't done it, you must. It's along a river, the Hoh River, so of course it's flat, easy walking. The moss. This is a unique place in the world, and it was one of the reasons I wanted to write this book, because Ruth Kirk, the great legendary Ruth Kirk, and Jerry Franklin had written a book about the old growth forests of the Hoh River. And it really, there hadn't been another book about the old growth forests of the Pacific Northwest since then, and that was in the 1990s. So, Hoh River Trail. But one of the places I went with Jerry Franklin, I also would really recommend to you, and this is Cedar Flats Research Natural Area. These are Forest Service lands that exist all over the country, these different research natural areas. It's not very big, but it is, according to Jerry Franklin, the finest example of an old growth forest in the lowland Cascades anywhere in the Pacific Northwest, and I would second that opinion. Here's the other great thing about it. It's outside of the town of Cougar, Washington. You can drive to the trailhead, and then it's very easy flat walking, so anybody can go, the smallest kid, elders in your family or your community, and it is a place of stupendous beauty. So for me, that walk brings to mind walking Cedar Flats, Katie. It's you walk into that forest and you leave everything behind. You're in a fairyland, a different world, Everything there is so much older than you will ever be. There's a sense of timelessness, of grandeur, of a kind of knowledge that isn't your knowledge. It's the knowledge that is held within these beings that are persisting in their long evolutionary stories into a far future, uninterrupted by us. And there's something very special about that. So it's the variety, it's the light, it's the quiet, it's the smells. I very often lie down and take a nap. These are never places to be in a hurry, and you should just let the specialness of it take you over.
Oh, yeah. There's something so comforting to me about the concept of a great being, a great organism that has lived there long before I was born and will be there long after I'm dead. I love that concept. But of course, your book doesn't just dwell on the beauty, even though there's a lot of that in this book. You also talk about the ways that it is systematically being destroyed, and that some of these organisms are not being left alone and will not be there when I'm long gone, or when any of us are long gone. And I want to read a portion of passage, on pages 123 and to 124 that frankly just made me really mad. And this is about the Lincoln Paper and Tissue Mill in Maine. So I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but you did go out to your native East Coast, your Northeast area, to see other old growth forests. So you went out to this mill that is now abandoned, and this is what you write. The mill produced products of everyday life. The postcards that tumble out of magazines trying to get you to subscribe, paper towels, napkins, plates, and stationery. It specialized in deep-dyed tissues used for pleasantries, party streamers, paper napkins, and tablecloth sets. In producing these ordinary things, the mill discharged extraordinary pollution in the Penobscot River. Dioxin and furin, contaminating the fish, sediments, and other natural resources. And as you go on to explain, dioxin is a potent and persistent pollutant that causes cancer in multiple species, including humans, disrupts the endocrine system, and suppresses the immune system. But hey, at least we had party streamers for Susie's birthday. So what was it like? So you're visiting these beautiful old trees, and then you go visit this mill, and you see how it continues to this day to pollute the ecosystem. Like, what does that feel like for you?
Well, I think one of the things that was shocking for me is one of the hallmarks of my career at the paper has always been working with the Native American tribes of our region. Nearly always when I would go out on a story, I would always seek to go out with some of the first people who know it best and in a different way, along with scientists as well, of course. And so when I went east to try to understand how we lost so much of our beautiful forests, I thought, well, I need to go out with people from the Penobscot tribe. And so I got to know the director of the forestry department and others at the tribe. And indeed, we went out to some of their forest lands to see how they manage them. We looked a lot at the Penobscot River, where they led dam removal efforts similar to our own. And I was thinking, well, gosh, one of the really great things to do would be to go to a community feast, just as we have here. There must be a first salmon ceremony. There must be a feast to go to. And it was a shock, and I was dismayed to learn that, no, there is no such thing, because they can't eat the fish from their own river. And so the people who have helped to lead the cleanup of the river, who have defended the river always, and who helped lead dam removal on the river, can't eat the fish from the river that bears their name. There's just too much cancer-causing dioxin, not only in the fish, but in the things that eat the fish. So, you know, it's a very, it's something you have to listen to and think about when you realize that these are terrible poisons that are created by making very ordinary things. And I did that on purpose in that passage to write about the party streamers. I've bought party streamers. I've bought those tablecloths. And in my house, we've just had a big, discussion about paper towels. So I very on purpose talked about the quotidian things, the everyday things that we use that have these lasting effects, to have us all think about consumption is a big part of this issue. It's all of us, and wood products, paper products. Look, I live in a wood house. I love to write with pencil on paper. I worked at a newspaper, for 40 years, different papers, and I write books. So I'm a big wood products user, obviously. But one of the things I wanted to talk about in this book was beginning a movement for local wood, similar to local food, and respect for wood product producers, such as we have for farmers. And to understand that, in the United States, we're so spoiled. We have so much land, and we have the gift of these incredible forests. We haven't thought about our consumption in the way that we should. And so when you talk about the Penobscot River, you talk about the pollution of the paper mills. To me, that was a really important thing to talk about. They now have the equivalent of the Rust Belt, basically dead pulp and paper mills from the Canadian border to the head of tide. And so those communities are really struggling to find a new future. But does this sound like Forks? Does this sound like Aberdeen? Does this sound like Cosmopolis? I mean, all of us that live in these natural resources communities have to be thinking about how do we go forward together to create a more sustainable way of making these products, using these products, and also taking care of the land. To me, this is going back to the teachings of the first people, which was never about that you don't use. It's how you use. And to me, that was a hopeful message, because it means people aren't the problem. People are not the problem. But how we use these products, how we live on this land, is what we need to think about. And this simple idea of living in an ethic of respect and reciprocity, those are two words. They're small words. They're familiar words. But if we take those words to heart, it changes so much.
We're going to talk about the first peoples that you spoke to, because they brought such great perspective to the book, and also the loggers that you spoke to. But one of the things I want to acknowledge is you are speaking to so many different people with this book, including all of you here tonight. And you are communicating, first of all, the fact of this organism that has lived for hundreds of years, that could go on living, and that's hard for the human mind to comprehend. And then, as you put it, you're communicating the extraordinary damage done to create ordinary things. So, we're both writers. We've both had to make a career of explaining to people, how the heck do you do that, Lynda? How do you communicate such immensity? Like, how do you set out to do that?
Typically, whether I'm trying to think about climate change, or I'm trying to think about forest ecology, or I'm trying to think about why southern resident killer whales are on the brink of extinction, I always try to go small before I go big. I maybe focus on one whale and her family, or I maybe, if I'm talking about forest ecology, I talk about one tree. Or if I'm talking about climate change, I'll talk about an aspect of it and build out from there. There's actually a term for this. We call it the keyhole, looking through a small thing to tell a big thing. And in this book, what really worked for me was the specificity of the stories. There was never just a forest. It was a particular place and a particular person and a particular community. That works for me as someone seeking to understand something, and also anyone telling a story. And so for me, it's always about intimacy. That's the thing I'm really interested in, both establishing, feeling, and communicating.
I assume those many people you talk to help with that as well, right? You're putting human stories in there. How do you find the right people to tell the right story?
This is such a big part of the job. So, I mean, for myself, especially working on the East Coast, the way I like to approach this is with frankness, for one thing, be very clear about who I am and what I'm doing and what I'm looking for. And so usually I'll go to a university, and that's what I did. I went to the University of Maine at Orono and went to the forestry department and said, here I am, and I want to learn about forestry practices in Maine, and I want to meet some people. I want to get out in the field with people who are loggers, people cutting trees. And the answer that came back was, oh, you need to meet Molly London, Logger of the Year. I thought, great, Molly's getting a call. And to her infinite credit, Molly was willing to put me in the truck and take me out and introduce me to her crew, and we spent time in the woods together. And then ultimately, I got to meet other members of her family, and this is the transformational work of reporting. You're not checking things off a list. You're actually exploring. You're learning new things and new people in order to understand a story in an immediate, physical, with people way. You're not just dialing it in from the internet. So I go on the hunt, and it's surprising how unusual, how rare it is that somebody just says, no, I don't want to do that. Most people are proud of what they do and who they are, and they can't wait to share it.
That's the most beautiful thing about journalism. Everyone always asks, like, oh, what if someone doesn't want to talk to you? You would be shocked to know how many people want to talk to you. Everyone has a story, and it's a beautiful opportunity to get to share that. And the people who share their stories range from conservationists and scientists to bloggers like Molly London. And this is kind of I know this is a broad question, but what would you say if you had to summarize what you learned from all of them? Was there a big lesson you took away from each of these individuals?
Yes, which is this love of place. Whether you're cutting the trees or you are a scientist observing the return of salmon and alewife to the Penobscot River, or you are a scientist learning the intimate knowledge of how an old-growth forest really works. It's about love of place, and it's about paying attention to place. A lot of people want to force a dichotomy between Western science and traditional ecological knowledge and, just workers in the woods. I really push back against that. I think what all three of those people have in common is an attention to an intimate connection to place. And to break that down a little bit more, one of the things I loved about Jerry Franklin was he was informed by the forest itself, not just bench experiments in a lab, but for instance, standing in an old-growth forest and seeing lots and lots of dead and downed wood everywhere, thinking, well, there's a lot of it, it must matter. Which opened a whole new understanding of dead and downed wood, which no one had been paying any attention to, and the whole life cycle of a forest in which a tree, once it's died, has really just begun a whole new phase of its life. And similarly, spending time with Molly in the woods and spending time with people from the Penobscot tribe in the woods, this is about love. And I find that very hopeful, because as much as we need to find solutions together, we can do that from love of home and love of place rather than some sort of abstract battle. And I saw people in communities working hard for local solutions to keep people working and keep producing the products that we need. And there will never be any one solution, because our forests are too different, our communities are too different. But there are some commonalities. One is that a bottom line has to be healthy communities rather than a cut-and-run extractive ethic of commodification that makes a few people rich and just leaves behind, say, for instance, a completely polluted river. That's what's put us where we are. But if you can work from an ethic of sustained use of a place for the future as well as the present, it changes everything.
Well, you mentioned forks earlier, and it makes me think of a very odd thing that sounds completely secondary, but it's the 20th anniversary of Twilight. And I mention that only because we look at Forks, which has rebranded as this little vampire town, and we wonder why. It's because industry left, right? And they have to recover in some way, and not everybody gets a whole series that drives teenage girls crazy. And you have to think of another way out. Something else that struck me about the number of voices in this book is the many perspectives, from dead wood to how to log responsibly to how forests feed our salmon and impact salmon. There are so many different ways to look at a tree. And it makes me wonder what you think that says about humanity's connection to trees. What does it say that we are so fascinated with every aspect of these things?
I think it goes all the way back to our DNA, right? I mean, if you go all the way back, we lived in trees. And I did climb a tree for this book.
Yes.
I felt like I had to do that to feel the tree move in the wind, to feel it bear my weight, to take on its scale, its heft, its enormity. I'll tell you something. I climbed trees at the Harvard Forest. Those were sweet little rounded, soft, deciduous pets. This thing that I climbed at the H.J. Edners Experimental Forest was a Douglas fir, 400 years old and 200 feet tall. Now, that's a different story. This thing growled like a wolverine. I think that people have an instinctual love for trees, and it's pan-cultural. It's in every country. It's primal, isn't it? I mean, it's as old as the campfire, literally, and it's as old as our species.
Older, even. I do want to dwell a moment on climbing because we had one question already submitted to us, and I'm going to use this as a reminder to be writing your questions down. We'll come around and gather those up. But this person wanted to know about climbing the tree, so I'm going to take this opportunity to ask you. And they wondered, does climbing a tree hurt it in any way? Does climbing it and the instruments you use in doing so change the tree's physiology at all? If so, please explain. Thank you. And I think that's such a thoughtful question.
It is a really thoughtful question. So we don't use any penetrating instruments like, spikes to climb up or anything like that. You shoot a rope over a branch using a bow and arrow over a very high branch. And then you literally push down on a little ascender on your foot and go up the rope itself. So you're climbing up a rope, actually. And then once you finally, and with a Douglas fir tree, it's quite a ways up there. It could be 40 feet. When you finally get to a branch, you can sit on a branch and look around. I certainly did. But you're climbing the rope, actually, not the tree. And so the tree is... I doubt it even knows this is happening. You're a speck. What's very interesting is that the other animals notice you. I mean, the chickadees notice you. Flying birds take a look. You're a thing, and you're not usually there, and you're definitely noticed. But the tree itself is definitely not harmed by our action. It's true that you don't really get to have a conversation about would it be okay with you if. That's true. And so in that way, you're making an assumption, but we certainly don't violate the tree in any way. I never name trees. I lived with a tree that I wrote about for a whole year in the Harvard Forest. I didn't name it. I didn't give it a gender. It's its own sweet self, and I let it have its own majesty and life.
They don't need human qualities to be special.
No, they certainly don't.
I've always wondered, going by trees, touching them, kind of looking at them. I'm like, do you know I'm here? And it's nice to think that, maybe they wear a speck. I like that.
Yeah, we're a speck, all right.
Well, to get back to our fellow specks, other people you spoke to. So as we've said, you talked to loggers out east and about their sense that people just see them as destroyers of the forest, but that you found they're quite thoughtful, at least some of them. What did you learn about how we can help maybe strike that balance with protecting ecosystems and environments and the trees, and also acknowledging that people need to live because we have created this world, and as I mentioned, not everyone gets a forks.
No, that's right. And one of the things that came up over and over again when I was with the loggers, they teased me a lot, and the first thing they teased me about was toilet paper. Like, where do you think it comes from? And when I was leaving after spending the day with them, one of us said, "Don't forget that toilet paper." And honestly, it has stayed with me. I think it does start with respect. It starts with understanding these products come from someplace. And they come from some people. And they are finite. And the people who create them are people just like you. And there is a lot of skill involved in the kind of careful logging that I saw, which was what we call, it's really pre-commercial thinning, where what you're doing is trying to improve a stand by taking out the small trees so that the bigger ones can grow bigger. And to do that, you use an incredibly expensive machine, $600,000 machine full of electronics, and it's operated by one person in a climate-controlled cab, and he's working off an iPad following a prescription that's been beamed to him of precisely how to operate in that forest for the desired result of taking out smaller things, which will be chipped, shipped, and turned into pulp, and yes, toilet paper, smaller, low-value stuff, to leave the bigger things to get bigger, to increase the value of the stand. This is a good thing. And believe me, there are untold acres of zombie forests out there that were used, turned into plantations. This is true in the Pacific Northwest as well. These are dense, dark, dog-ear forests that are fire traps. There's no food in there. There's very little life in there. And they've been so highly altered by us, by cutting them to the ground, sometimes burning them, sometimes pesticiding the ground, replanting with a monoculture. These are no longer forests. These are now fiber farms, and for them to ever be forests again, they will need intervention. They will need human hands and hearts to go in and open them up and return a diversity of plants, bring in a true understory. This creates jobs. True forest restoration creates not only products but jobs. So this is a hopeful thing that people need to know. Of course, it's all in the details. What does it really look like on the ground? But we can know those, and we can do those things. And I know it's being done because I saw it being done. The people who employed Molly London and her husband, it was their biggest contractor is the Appalachian Mountain Club, for heaven's sakes. This is one of the largest, oldest outdoor clubs in the United States. And the AMC has what they call their Maine Woods Initiative, in which they seek donations to buy land, and they do three things with it. One, they set a third of it aside for permanent conservation, period. Two, recreational opportunities, trails, maybe a simple ski cabin. This is the kind of thing that they're known for. Number three, restoration forestry, where they hire local people to do restoration forestry, of taking these zombie forests and improving the quality of the stands. This is the opposite of high grading. It's the opposite of degradation. It's rescue, and it's creating jobs in local communities where those dollars really matter. And traditions really matter. Molly and her husband want to work in the woods. They're young people. It's unusual to see young people willing to take on the debt, take on the risk of running an independent family-owned logging company. And they were doing it, and it was exciting to see what they were doing, both their pride in it and, frankly, the fun. And the people who were working for them were so well treated. They had a 401k. They were well paid. They enjoyed their jobs. They were doing the work they want to do. Not everybody wants to work with a keyboard.
I was just going to say, they're not only creating jobs, it's not like you're sitting behind a desk. These are jobs where people are getting out into the woods, getting to know their woods, and understanding the ecological value of those places. Now, of course, these are very modern approaches to these things, and forest conservancy and managing it with many things in mind goes back a lot farther than folks that look like you and I, Lynda. And you talk to a lot of Indigenous folks about these native practices on native territories and these ways of preserving the land that worked for tribes for generations before they were interrupted. So I want to read this from pages 156 to 157. You're talking about land management on the Penobscot Indian Territory in Maine near that mill that we talked about before. So this stands in stark contrast to what you experienced at the mill. Although they are cut, Penobscot forest lands are managed for multiple values: consistent income, jobs for tribal members who get hiring preference, water quality protection, and enhancement and protection of the cultural integrity of the tribe. Clear cuts, where they do them, usually are limited to less than 5 acres. A little bigger, maybe 8 acres, if they are done primarily to create open areas for wildlife such as deer. The tribe does not use herbicides on their land, and all regeneration is natural. They weren't just managing these lands for clients or unknown investors. This was their home place forever. And that is a beautiful vision of living in harmony with the land. And I wonder if you think it's possible to grow that vision at scale and expand it far beyond the tribes?
I'm sure it's possible. I'm certain that it's possible. And I think that one of the things that would help would be if consumers, people like you and me, were willing to pay more for products that are grown that way and certified in some way that we know that they are sustainable. We do this with food now. There's no reason we couldn't do it with wood. We do have some certification systems at this time. They're pretty confusing. They're pretty flawed. I think they don't take in some of the elements that they should. The consumer is one of the most powerful pieces of this puzzle. What we buy, who we buy it from, what we don't buy, what we decide we don't actually really need. All of these decisions really count. And I want to speak a little bit about what was so startling going out and visiting the woods that day with the tribe. There were two things. They had used a contractor to do the logging that we were looking at, and they hadn't been on the land since that logging had been done. And to watch how incredibly attentive to every detail they were, just how the land had been left, it reminded me of how we come back into our home after we've had a guest while we were away. And they were just so attentive to any detail. And secondly, there were so many animals. There were moose, there were turkey, there were birds, and every time we saw an animal, all work stopped. And then there were the hot dogs. The red hots. Does anyone here know what a red hot is? Okay, this is a Maine thing, and it's the color of this gentleman's jacket. It's frighteningly red, and they have a frighteningly snappy little case. And one of the guys on the crew brought his little cook set, and we sat on the tailgate and had red hots at the end of the day. It was a marvelous day together. So yeah, I am hopeful that these things can be done at scale, and they should be. What we've asked too little. We've asked way too little. I mean, one of the things that Jerry Franklin said early on in our time together that really changed the direction of this book, after we were walking around the Cedar Flats natural area, he said, I want to show you something. I said, okay, what? And we get in our trucks and we go down the road, and here's this clear cut like the ones we've all seen. It's just baking in the sun, and it's a pretty much bombed out, destroyed looking area. And he said, people need to know that all is not well. This was private, industrially logged land. And he said, this is not okay. There are no throwaway people, and there are no throwaway places. All of the acres need to be treated better than this. And what would that take? That would take passing a law in Washington requiring that you have to do better than just 40 and even less years of rotation. We export a lot of the wood that we cut on private lands. You see it on ships leaving Port Angeles, going overseas to do, to be used for cement forms. And, if you're worried about whether we have enough lumber, we'll stop sending it away. And we can require much more from these landowners in terms of how those lands are managed. Managed also for climate, managed also for clean water, managed also for wildlife, not only for profit for distant investors. As Jerry Franklin said to me, look, you manage for only one thing, you're going to get a distorted outcome, no matter what that one thing is, and that a more balanced approach is needed. I would say that includes on Washington state lands. The rule now on our lands that we manage for production in Washington state is 5 trees left per acre. That's not very much.
Well, and also, how can those trees work in community together when there's so few of them? Because as we know, they work in networks. They're kind of like people. There's one thing I want to go back to that you mentioned, and you mentioned it in the book a couple of times, the concept of seeing wood products like we see local food. And I do wonder, though, so I'm a childless woman, I'm a professional woman, I live with my partner, hi Drew, and so we have shared finances, we have financial freedom that a lot of people don't. I think of a single mom with several children who can't splurge on wood product. I wonder how we can create, and maybe this is too much to ask of you, Lynda, but how do we create the system where we are prioritizing these wood products the same way we do with local food, being willing to pay more, but recognizing that not everybody can, especially with the way affordability is going today?
one of the first things I would like to see, Katie, is a more equitable society.
Oh, yeah, look at that. That would be lovely.
As I said, this only works if communities are healthy.
Yes.
To the extent they're living in exploitive systems and oppressed, they're not going to be worried about the price of plywood. They're going to be worried about feeding their kids. So honestly, health starts at home, and health has to be throughout society. If you're living in the kinds of inequitable society that we are today, people have much more serious things to worry about in their lives, and that's not how it should be.
Great answer. Thank you. We're the right person to ask. So I want to ask that same kind of question, that can we do this at scale, in a slightly different way, and borrow your own words from page 181. The question in my mind, you wrote, is whether more of these sorts of changes can happen at big enough scale quickly enough to save the best of what's left, fix what we can, and stop wrecking more. The salmon and the forests are speaking, and what they are telling us is we are about out of time. Today, the old-growth trees, these last precarious remnants of the grandeur that used to be, are at risk, even where they are protected. So, Lynda, what do you think? How can we change the course of the future now?
I really think this is a fundamental question of values. I think it's a much bigger question than how do we log or where do we log. Look, by the end of the research on this book, I felt like logging was like quaint. At least it's a choice. It's something under our control. I mean, by the combined forces of globalization and climate and our forest practices of the past, we've created a situation in which, even in protected areas, our forests are under attack by bugs, by disease, by hot drought, by fire. Gosh, how many acres of the Olympic National Park are burning right now as we talk? The Olympic National Park, a human-caused fire, by the way. So, look, this is really about not the details of logging, it's about how we decide we're going to live on this land together. And as long as it's about commodification of everything, even one another, that's what's brought us to where we are today.
Well, I think that's a good place to transition into the fact that talking about the environment today, it's hard not to get a little into politics. So I'm going to take us there. And even though policy can be about as dry as the kindling that feeds these wildfires, it can also be just as devastating. And I wonder what you can tell us about environmental policy today and how it might affect our ability to protect old-growth trees and so much more that depends on them.
Well, right here in the Pacific Northwest right now, the Northwest Forest Plan, which protected millions, that's an M, millions of acres of old-growth trees, is open for update by the Trump administration. This began under the Biden administration and did not get finished, and so it's still ongoing. And what an update could mean would be anything from terminating the protections currently in place for old-growth trees to opening other areas for logging that are not presently available. So that's something to pay close attention to. It's in a public process right now. And the other thing to be paying close attention to is the presidential executive order that came out last spring to increase by 25% overall, 25%, the amount of logging going on federal lands across the country. Where are those trees going to come from, Katie? I think a lot of them would come from right here. So, look, an executive order is not policy. An executive order is very often red meat for the base. We still have the Clean Water Act. We still have the Endangered Species Act. We still have courts of law. And the thing to be paying attention to is these timber sales once they start to come out of the Federal Forest Service offices. I would say a couple things about these calls for upping the cut. Number one, a lot of what they want to do is illegal. And number two, there's nobody left to do it because they've defunded the Forest Service and laid off so many people. So this is a very chaotic time, and that's on purpose. And the thing to do in a time of chaos is to pay attention. Don't be distracted. Keep your eye on the ball. Pay attention as these Forest Service sales come forward. None of them have yet, I would add. A lot of the mapping underlying these executive orders was so incredibly sloppy. It included wetlands, tribal lands, lands that aren't even federal lands. So, and I would also say that here in the Pacific Northwest, we're blessed with tribal nations that are deeply invested in caretaking of these places. Honoring the treaties is one of the most profound and effective environmental steps we can all take. We're blessed and fortunate to live in a place where we have strong treaty protections for the landscapes and for the people, the first people of this place. We also have an enormous number of talented and committed forest NGOs and wildlife NGOs, and also, of course, university scientists. It's terrifying to me to see the attack on science, which is a fundamental blow to not only democracy, but life on Earth. So, my answer to you about the importance of politics, it's absolutely central to what we all need to be paying attention to. And if you didn't vote in the last election, you better vote in the next one.
And that goes for all elections, by the way. I've been a reporter covering elections. Local elections matter too. Just a little side note. So you talked a lot about a great deal of scientific research being done on these lands as well, in protected forests here in the Pacific Northwest, out in the Northeast, all over the place. And I believe many of the trips you talked about occurred in 2022, 2023. Is that about right? So I wonder, there's been a couple of interesting years since then. I wonder what you know about how that research is going today. Is it ongoing? Is funding being threatened in those arenas, if you will?
Well, the answer to that is mixed and quite disturbing. For instance, I spent a lot of time at the H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest, which is a Forest Service installation outside of Eugene, Oregon. They have no idea if they're going to have any funding in the next budget. I mean, like any funding. So that's hard to contemplate. Here's a federal institution that's been underway now for decades, literally opening our knowledge of old-growth forests, that's a thing. It's a separate and different type of forest with its own characteristics and contributions ecologically. The very people who started the experimental forest, some of them, like Jerry Franklin, they don't even know if that place is going to have any money, Katie, in the next federal budget. So that's really hard to contemplate. I was just with Matt Betts, who's the lead principal investigator at the Andrews. We were looking at the Andrews after it burned. There was a wildfire at the Andrews that burned 3/4 of it in the summer of 2022. So I went back to look at it with Matt this spring for a story in the paper. And it was a dramatic unfolding of change. When a forest burns, it becomes a whole new forest with a whole new suite of life, new birds, new everything. And here I am in a place that, because there's such a deep baseline of scientific knowledge about it, it's now a living laboratory of how do you see a forest go through the transition of a forest fire and how it resets, how it regrows. Will we get to learn any of those things? Will we? Or will it just shut down and the buildings will become what? A yoga studio? I mean, it's just hard to imagine that these things could happen, but a lot of things have been happening that are hard to imagine.
I think that part of the book was devastating and then kind of hopeful. I mean, you're describing the Andrews, this forest that hasn't seen fire for 500 years, and how the scientists kind of pivoted, though, to this is an opportunity like no other to see how a forest of 500 years old creatures responds. And as we know, fire is a part of the system, and it's getting scarier every year and more frequent, and wildfires started by humans is not a thing that 500-year-old trees could have comprehended when they first were saplings. I mean, I think you're getting it across, but how can we, those of us who have not spent as much time among these trees, comprehend what is at stake here in terms of the science? And the science is one thing, but what it can do to contribute to humanity or not if it is lost.
Well, I mean, these forests are crucial for our well-being. They take in the carbon dioxide from the air that is stoking climate change. They hold the water in the soil. They cool the temperatures. They're home to biodiversity, and they are home to the human spirit. These forests are essential to life on Earth as we know it and love it. And not only the old growth forests, but the older forests that are the older natural forests, so they are the old growth of tomorrow. These are absolutely essential. And the scientists and the science that understand and help guide policy in these forests, well, those are the equivalent of binoculars or glasses or windows or windshields. How do you know where you're going if you don't know anything about where you are? And so maintaining scientific integrity, maintaining scientific knowledge is absolutely crucial to guide us through life that's only going to get more complicated and more difficult as climate change continues to bear down. I mean, nothing's going to get simpler, nothing's going to get easier. Why would you want to throw away anything that can help guide your decisions?
Oh, but I thought AI was supposed to save us, Lynda. Isn't that supposed to make everything easier? All right, so I have one more question before we're going to take audience questions. So if we could gather those up, if you can all complete your little questions, it's wonderful when the audience participates. So just flag Stasha down, and we'll come around and grab those from you. But I'm thinking, too, of research like studies about dead wood and how important that is. Like, I remember first reading about nurse logs. Like, I'd seen them. I'm from Florida. We got a lot of trees. And just like the concept of a nurse log continues to just mesmerize me today. It's one of the most, I think, beautiful things in nature. But why is it important to even study something like that? Why is it important that that science not only continues, but grows?
Because it's how we understand the system, and how we understand how one thing is connected to another thing, how we can understand the continuity to the next generation of the forest. And as a matter of fact, when you understand that, that's when you understand why clear cutting is a problem, because you're taking away that continuity to the next generation. You're taking away the nurse logs. You're taking away the mycorrhizal fungi in the soil. You're taking away all of these tiny little things that enable the big things to happen. In nature, everything is connected. And if you don't understand it, and you don't have any way of knowing what an action will lead to, you could very easily do the wrong thing.
That makes me think of the mangrove forests that I grew up around, and learning later in life like how vital those are to Florida's waterways. And like, say when you have a hurricane come through and disrupts that, or you have a development come through and disrupt that, you can see how drastically that waterway and that area changes. Like, that is home for little crabs, it's home for birds. It's amazing to learn all those small ways that these organisms affect us and the landscape. I'm trying to kill some time.
Here's some questions.
Thank you. Beautiful. All right. Ooh, okay, and we're starting with a big one, and I think there are a variety of answers to this, but I'm going to pose it to you. So, who owns the forests? And I'm going to leave it vague like that.
Well, I think the forest owns the forest. I think the forest is its own sovereign self. Of course, we have our own ideas about ownership. It's federal, it's tribal, it's privately owned. But the truth of the matter is the forest owns itself. And I think that it's also true that the forest has its own imperatives and its own rules and its own laws. And if those are violated, the forest won't thrive. One of the scientists that I work with is Suzanne Simard up in BC, and she started out life as a forester working for BC Timber. And she became curious about why, after a forest was clear-cut, logged, and then replanted into a monoculture, the trees weren't doing very well. And she was curious about that, and she began to wonder, well, maybe it was because it didn't have any of its companion plants. It didn't have an understory. It didn't have any of the plants that used to be there, and the soil had been scraped away and herbicided. And so she got interested in the whole idea of the connections between trees and the soil, and the mycorrhizal fungi between the roots. And her work exploded our understanding of the ways in which trees are connected, and in which, even though trees are standing there seemingly as individuals above ground, they're actually connected as a community. And, you know, I think when I think about a forest and how it actually functions, interconnected like that, and continuing one generation to the next, each generation nourishing the next, each tree also in a relationship with an animal, to me, that's both very beautiful, but it's also, I think forests are wonderful mentors for us in the ways that we are interconnected, the ways that we all need one another, and that if you separate us, if you break us apart, we don't do as well. And so when you ask me who owns a forest, I think a forest owns a forest. A forest has its own way of doing things, and I think we can learn from those things, and the idea of the hubris that we could just wipe that away and replace it with a monoculture that we planted and that you're getting a forest is foolhardy.
There's a whole lot of companies who think they own the forests, but that's up for debate. I love this next question. What are the trees in urban areas saying?
I am really glad this came up. One of the things that people often ask me is, well, what can I do? What can each of us do? Well, number one, if you haven't been to Seward Park, you should go. Seward Park is where you can find some of Seattle's remaining old growth. And those trees will speak to you, that is for sure. Go in any season, go for any reason, go with a friend, go alone. It's important to know the trees in our parks. It's crucial to take care of the trees in our parks. It's crucial to take care of the trees in our city. I mean, I am dismayed at the cutting down of the large trees in the side yards. It doesn't have to be this way. And it's always, oh, well, we need that land for housing. Well, then we should design it in such a way that we can keep the tree and still have the density. It's possible. People just need to bother, and they need to try, and they need to be pushed to try. We live in, allegedly, the evergreen state in the Emerald City. And this, put it on a flag. This is who we are and who we need to be. And Seattle, in my view, Seattle has a lot of problems. I know that, and I have deep regard for public officials. I think that's one of the hardest jobs in the world. But I would really like to see much more of a focus on our urban trees. Every tree matters. It cools, it provides beauty, it soothes us. There are so many birds in my little urban yard. It's a corner lot a block from Aurora, and it's stuffed with birds. Why? Because I have trees. And so be inspired about the trees right here. Make friends with them, stand up for them. There's so many great tree groups in Seattle doing so much good work to pull off and get rid of the invasive vines, to take care of a native understory, to replant, to defend. I'll tell you something. When I worked in Massachusetts on Witness Tree, one of the books that came out before this one, here's what I found out in Massachusetts. They have a thing called a tree warden. You like the sound of that? In every single town, there is a tree warden. And there are, by the way, more than 500 towns in the state of Massachusetts. And that person's job is to stand up for any tree that's going to be cut in the public right-of-way. There's a hearing, and it's held at the tree. Why don't we have that? Why don't we have that? We should have tree wardens in Washington State. And we should be much more connected to our urban trees. They're so important. I mean, in this last week when it was so hot, what did you seek? Shade. My house was cooler inside than it was outside because of the trees. So I'm really glad this question came up. And if you're not part of any of the wonderful groups in Seattle that are working on taking care of our urban trees, if you haven't been to a city council meeting about the tree ordinance, it's time to get involved. And we have to take better care of our parks. Some of them have been overrun with invasive plants and trash. Jose Rizal Park with that incredible view looking back over downtown has become kind of a throwaway place. There shouldn't be any throwaway parks at all. They all matter tremendously.
I nominate Lynda for Seattle Tree Warden. That's all.
I would do it. I would do it for free, and I'd do it forever. Call me, I'm yours. Yeah, the Lorax has nothing on me. I'm ready.
We'll get the mayor on the phone right away.
Okay, I'm ready. Speed dial.
I love this question as well because it kind of jumps off from that question about what are the urban trees saying. And this person wonders, how do the trees speak? And I'll add to that, how do you speak to the trees?
I love that. Okay, obviously it's a metaphor, but not by much. I mean, I have a tree that is on the corner of our property. It was a beautiful western hemlock. It's one of the reasons we bought our house 17 years ago. My husband said, oh, it has really good trees. And this big old western hemlock was one of the ones he was talking about. Okay, so fast forward to 2015. And in the drought of 2015, that tree started to die. Now, why was that? Well, that was because SDOT chopped a big corner off of the sidewalk in order to put in a ramp. Okay, I'm happy about the ramp, but did they really have to, cut into the tree's roots and then pave over it with black asphalt? Great little heat sink. Well, my tree started to die, and believe me, it spoke to me as it died year by year, and more needles on the ground, and ultimately we had to cut it, because it was on a corner right over two meeting sidewalks. And so we cut it very high as a wildlife snag. It's worth seeing. This tree is so drilled with cavities and cavity nesting birds. And I had a flicker nest. This thing's a block from Aurora. And it's wildlife city. So yes, it speaks to me. It speaks of, what was lost, but also the honor that it still holds as a citizen of a forest that's home to all kinds of birds, all kinds of bees, very interestingly. So, get to know your trees in every stage, in your yard, in your neighborhood. Love them, know them, write to them, leave poems in their branches. They will appreciate you and you will love them.
We were talking about our pea patches before we started, and at the Trolls Knoll pea patch where I have a plot, Seattle City Fruit gave us a bunch of fruit trees a couple years ago. So we have a little mini orchard, and my goodness, I have learned a lot about how trees will speak to you and tell you all the ways you're doing it wrong if you're not careful from those trees. And now we're starting to get beautiful plums from one of our trees, and that feels really lovely. Well, I took a knock at AI earlier, so this question spoke to me. What can we do to expose the potential loss of water, energy, and natural habitat due to AI data farms? And we talked about this a little, Lynda.
Right. So I don't know if you all noticed the story about the Columbia River that I had out in the paper. That was an epic capstone project, and I've been infected by the Columbia River for a very long time. I care about that river. I've been writing about it, studying about it, traveling it, thinking about it since 1992. It's going to be my next book. Stay tuned. I think that, what's happening with this just incredible taking of our water and our energy for AI. I don't even understand why we're letting this happen. Don't you feel like we just need a giant pause button? Like, what are we even talking about? Why are we doing this? Why is this being allowed? I don't get it. We do have a Northwest Power and Conservation Council in the Pacific Northwest that is writing a power plan now that is taking some of this into account, but I don't know, doesn't it feel like an all-hands-on-deck moment? I feel like there are profound shifts underway right now in our governance of the Columbia River, and are we even thinking about the future in the ways that we need to? What about the tribal treaty rights still in place since 1855? Why does AI suddenly seem to take prominence over these covenants that we've entered into? Not only greed is exactly what it's about, and I'm troubled by what I see, and I think we need to get to work.
On a slightly lighter note, this person asks what I think is a lovely little question. First of all, they said, thank you for your most excellent writing, Lynda. And yes, I think we can all agree. And they would like to know, what is one of your favorite trees and one of your favorite rivers?
Well, the Columbia, as I said. And my favorite tree, that is so hard, but I think I'm going to say the red cedar. The way that tree looks when it's wet, when the drops of rain come all the way to the ends of the Ys, the way the little overlapping green plates make each and every branch so perfect, the aspect of the way they stand, the way they smell, It's called the Tree of Life for a reason.
I love the smell of those. I think that was the first thing that captivated me about this place, was like the size, the scale of these things. They're a lot bigger than a mangrove. And the smell, you can just you smell it from far off. It's beautiful.
Yes.
This person wants to know, what was one of the biggest surprises in your research for this book?
Oh, I love that question. I would have to say that one of the biggest surprises was how damn hard it was to climb that tree. I was highly insulted and a little bit ashamed. I thought I was good at this. I mean, I've been to women's tree climbing workshops. I've got the t-shirt. It was super hard and downright terrifying, which I really didn't want to admit. But yeah, that was a surprise. I was surprised at how hard it was. It's just very, very tall, very big. Yeah.
Well, I'll give you kudos no matter how hard it was. I'm terrified of heights. And so just reading about it, I was like, no, I'll stay down here on the ground.
It was worth it. I will say that. It was worth it. And I would do it again. Yes, I would.
Perfect.
Yes.
And now you know how to get started better.
I do.
And faster, at least.
I do.
They're also wondering, what did you change your mind about or understand differently?
Logging.
Yeah.
So it was really important to spend time out with the logging crew. It was also really important to understand that all logging doesn't have to be bad. As a definite Lorax tree hugger, I wanted to force myself to confront the fact that we all need wood products. We use wood products. How can we do this better? Your exact question of earlier, how can we have both? Because we have to. And what I became convinced of is possible to do this better. It can't be a quick buck, and it can't always be the easy way. That's a surprise. Isn't it that way with everything? So why would we expect that, somehow magic presto chainsaw, we can have better logging without paying more for it or paying people more for it or doing it more carefully? Duh. But this is good news. It's possible. I know it's possible because I've seen it done.
So for your Lorax-mindedness, forest restoration is expensive, as you're acknowledging. Do you have practical advice for small family forest owners on how to do it?
I think they are already really good at it. I think these are the models that need to be brought forward. Small family foresters are some of the most conscientious that you'll find anywhere, because these are the lands that they want to pass on in their family. And they want to take care of them, and they want them. These are basically the same ethos of tribal forestry programs. They're managing for the future. And so, if anything, I would like to see our state provide more support for those family operations, because they need money to hire foresters and make plans for their land. And, these are the kind of practices that need to be encouraged and supported. And so, I think they already are doing some of the best, most careful logging you'll see anywhere in Washington.
I think that gets at this next question a bit, and you acknowledge this in your book too, that you also have to talk about how things are good. How have you seen the treatment of forests advance, especially since the 90s?
Oh gosh, we've done so much better. First of all, you should know that Washington State is one of the best managed in the country for forestry, hands down. And I'm speaking here of contrasting it with the way plantation forestry is done in other places elsewhere in the world too. This is a place that's way better than, say, Canada. Beautiful natural British Columbia. This is terrifying. They're still cutting 1,000-year-old trees in Canada, and just for commodities. So, that's wrong, and it shouldn't be happening, and there isn't a scientist in the world who would defend it. So, in Washington on DNR lands, it's gotten better, and it's getting better even right now. I don't know if you saw in the paper today that the Commissioner of Public Lands is setting aside more mature forests for preservation. This is very important and very good. It's not enough. There should be more. Some of those sales that were rushed through at the end of the last administration, I've been to those forests, I've seen them, and you would look at those as a Washingtonian and say, tell me again why? And so here in Washington, improvements are being made, and more should be made in terms of how many trees are left after we do our cutting, how selective we are. And as I said, on the private and industrial lands, which is where most woods products come from in Washington, by far, we're not even trying.
So in that line of thinking, how do we change Seattle development policies to save our trees? And I'll expand that to how do we change policy across our continent and maybe even further to save our trees?
With love and care. I mean, you can't cut them down and take care of them at the same time. So, I mean, it's this. The last chapter of my book is called Homekeeping, and the reason for that is that we need to think about this as our home and treat it as we would our home, and think of ourselves as guests. What's the first rule of a guest when you go in somebody else's home? What's the first thing? Number one, don't break anything. Number two, say thank you. Number three, look for ways to be helpful. Helpful. So those should be guiding principles of how we conduct ourselves on these lands on which we are so fortunate to live.
You know, we've also talked a lot about logging and like the physical things people have done to affect these trees. But this is a good question to also remind us that climate change is a thing. So they ask, will climate change or destroy evergreens and the rainforest?
In a word, yes. I mean, these hot droughts that we're already seeing the effects of. The Olympic forest should not be burning. That's not a good thing. Hot droughts are a special kind of drought. Trees can only hold on to their moisture as long as there's moisture to replenish them. So what they do to preserve their lives when it's hot and droughty is they shut their stomata, the pores through which they breathe. When they do that, they also can't take in the carbon dioxide. This is their food, which is why plants turn yellow as they start to wilt and die. So, you know, a tree is an incredibly and magnificently resilient thing. They can die back, basically reduce their size and what they try to keep alive while they wait for better times. If those times never come, ultimately the tree will just plain die. They're also damaged by cavitation. This is the bursting of their internal plumbing by which they move photosynthate and water throughout their structure. So hot droughts kill trees by literally pulling moisture out of the tree. It's a vapor pressure deficit. There's less moisture in the air than there is in the tree. It's literally sucking moisture out of the tree. And the only way the tree can prevent that is by shutting down its ability to produce food. So trees that are under that kind of drought stress can die back, and they can try to persist, but ultimately they're going to die. And talking to some of the scientists who have been watching this happen in other places that are more severely affected by hot drought than we presently are, it's a terrible thing. Trees can't run away. They have to take it. And in this way, these conditions that we have created of climate and unchecked global commerce that's allowing all these invasive pests to come into our native forests. I mean, it's a tragic thing that we're now losing entire species, especially in the East Coast. It started with chestnut, then it was elm, and now it's beech, and it's also the hemlocks. We're losing entire species in our forests because of invasive pests. So can climate change completely change our forests? It can, and it is.
Folks who subscribe to the book club newsletter, which you should, KUOW.org/books, have to put that in there. You'll know that I'm a big horror fan, and one of the things I've noticed recently is the extent of environmental horror that's come on the scene that is envisioning these worlds where trees are gone. And it feels especially scary to me because it feels possible in, maybe not quite in my lifetime, but close to. And I think it says something that fear is permeating fiction as well, and that these writers are envisioning, like, it's not just apocalypse anymore. It's apocalypse without oceans. It's apocalypse without trees. So we should think about that. Kate asks, so Dave Up the Grove, DNR director, is that correct?
Commissioner of Public Lands.
Thank you, Commissioner of Public Lands, my bad. He has so set aside forests of structural significance, and at the same time you have the logging industry that wants to log what they consider they have a right to. And So Kate wonders, how do we find a common ground in these seemingly incompatible perspectives?
One of the things that Washington State is so challenged by, and I can say this because I'm not from here, is we don't have a reasonable, sensible tax system. So the idea that we're cutting down trees to pay for basic services like police cruisers in Hoquiam is frankly ridiculous. I mean, this is a third world paradigm, and there needs to be an equitable, sensible tax system in the state of Washington so we don't have to cut down our children's forests so they can go to a decent school building. It's worse than that because in communities that don't pass levies, they don't even get these school construction funds. So you're cutting down stuff in Chehalis that, is being sent away to Bellevue. So it's deeply morally wrong. Everybody knows it. This has been discussed by legislature after legislature, and there needs to be a change in how we pay for basic social and public safety services in the state of Washington, especially in rural areas, so you don't have communities trying to make this Faustian choice. It's very interesting right now. Some of the counties that are opposed to these DNR sales are rural counties, places like Jefferson County, places like Thurston County, even Clallam County. And the reason this is happening is because they value the trees that remain close to our communities. Yes, we have national parks. Yes, we even have DNR forests, but these naturally generated, structurally complex forest trees, 90, 100 years old, these are beautiful, special places. And the idea that we have to cut them down so that you can have a second police cruiser in Hoquiam is just asking people to do something that in this day and age, in this climate, does that really make sense? It's a fair question and it's a good question. And we actually have more options than we're allowing ourselves.
So going back to that equitable society that we need, yeah.
Yeah. Back to that. It has a way of underlying everything.
Yes. All right, a lighter question. I'm going to take just a couple of more because we're running a little light on time, so I apologize to anybody whose question I didn't get to this evening. We have really great ones, and I love seeing that. Wondering how long you can go without tree time before you start to notice something is missing.
I don't go without tree time.
Oh, that's it. You're just like, I can't
it's not a thing. No is a complete sentence.
That's fair. So a good last audience question, I think, is what's next? You mentioned that there's a book, but what else are you working on? What's got your goat?
I am working hard on a book proposal for the University of Washington Press about the Columbia River. I've always known that I was going to need to write a big book about that river sometime before I shuffle off my mortal coil. I think the Columbia really matters, and it's such a time of change, tremendous change for that river. So that's right in the center of my plate. I'm very interested in the Arctic right now. I just got back from a reporting trip in the Arctic to do a piece for the Seattle Times and for Bird Note. Do you all know Bird Note, that wonderful program about birds with 8.5 million listeners? And something for all things considered about that trip. There's been a call to open up the Arctic for oil and gas drilling to enable total energy dominance. And to go up there and see 23 million acres of land, public land, all yours, never wrecked, that's a life-changing experience. So that just happened. Working on writing that and finishing the research right now. Gosh, so many things. I probably want to do a book about the salmon people with the salmon people and make that a mentoring project with tribal youth. I think that would be a beautiful experience. So lots of things. It's a great privilege to have this time to focus on passion projects, and that's just exactly what I'm doing.
Well, I want to also just mention this beautiful question. I think it's something we can all kind of think about. And they asked just how do you value a tree, and kind of contemplating the valuation of trees and maybe looking beyond the financial aspect of that. But I do also want to end with some awe and some beauty, because there is so much of that in your book, Lynda. It's beautiful. And this is from page 186 as you walked through the big Indian wilderness in New York with a group of scientists. And you write, It was rather marvelous watching these dozens of people circle the big busted up trees by the brook with their broken tops, cavities in their branches, and trunks sometimes caved in at the base, yet still very much alive. They were peering closely at lichens and awed by their coexistence with these trees through the centuries. How very fine to encounter not only these old trees, but also people so excited to be with them. All around, they were spending quiet moments just savoring life from the lichen and liverwort's perspective. Isn't that also what old growth does for people? It is a gift of awe, of wonder, just to be in an old forest. So in case we need a reminder, or maybe a summary, why should we all care for these forests that you have spent your life with?
Katie, I can't say it any better than that.
Yes, it is quite perfect.
And I do love spending a day with lichen people.
They seem quite special, right? Like,
They're different.
We could have a whole
They're
separate.
super different.
All right, Lynda. Well, Lynda V. Mapes, author of The Trees Are Speaking, Dispatches from the Salmon Forest, and so much more. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you, all of you.
Yes, thank you. All right, and before I release you, I'll just let you know that Third Place Books is here tonight. We adore Third Place. They're huge supporters of reading and of the KUOW Book Club, but they've got copies of Lynda's books, so please grab a copy. Stick around to have Lynda sign. She and I are going to be up here until maybe about 8:30, so we can sign books, we can chat. I also want to give a huge thank you to the folks at the Seattle Public Library and the Seattle Public Library Foundation for being our partner this summer. It's been a real joy to bring these conversations to our community, and I cannot wait to partner again, Stasha. So thank you all.